Well, thank you so much, all of you, for joining in today's debate about this very important topic about regulation of different artificial intelligence tools and its usage in parliaments, which is a topic of the utmost relevance and importance. I will be your moderator today. I have drafted a few proposed questions to bring to each one of you according to your expertise, and I will proceed accordingly. But before we start, I'd like to yield the floor to each one of you to briefly introduce yourself and your relation to this particular topic. Fotios, would you like to introduce yourself to the colleagues and how you have been working with this topic for years now?
Thank you very much. This is Fotios Fitsilis from the Hellenic Parliament, the Parliament of Greece in Athens, as well as the team leader and co-founder of the Hellenic OCR team, which is an initiative to study parliaments and their data. I've been working on advanced algorithms, so not only artificial intelligence, but other types of really complex and advanced algorithms like blockchain or Internet of Things and so on for the past several years. And artificial intelligence obviously presents a very hot topic that everybody is interested in, and we would like to support the parliamentary community in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fotios. We just saw that your very interesting presentation, Jonathan, but feel free to reintroduce yourself to the colleagues that just joined us.
Excellent. Yeah, my name is Jonathan from NovaWorks. We've been working with parliaments around the world for the last sort of 17 plus years on an advisory type of role, and also a system implementer and integration role as well. So yeah, I've had a lot of experience around the use of artificial intelligence, a lot of sort of exposure around the technology side and the interactions of Parliament and how that relates to Parliament.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Joshua, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone, Josh Kravitz. I'm leading our technology and modernization efforts on the Senate Appropriations Committee. Just to caveat, I'm here as an individual, not representing the committee or the chair or vice chair of the committee. My background is in computer science for my undergrad and statistics for my master's. So I have a pretty technical background, so here to kind of provide a perspective from the technical side of things and about how we've applied some AI tools and digital tools within the committee. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Professor Monica, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, for sure. I'm a professor of legal informatics at University of Bologna, and I've been working in the domain of IEN law for several years, decades, not limited to artificial intelligence, but also in the semantic web and legal tech, especially. I'm also one of the standards that now is used in several parliaments for annotating documents. The name is Comantoso, legal.ml, based on XML. And from my perspective, we have also several projects of AI and law in parliaments, generally with several parliaments, the Senate of Italy, but also the European Commission and so.
Thank you so much, Professor Monica, for your introduction. We are just waiting for Patricia to rejoin. She's having some technical issues with her audio. While we wait for Patricia, I'd like to kickstart our debate today, bringing the first questions. And Jonathan, I'll bring the first question to you and to Fotios. Parliamentary operations, they have unique needs and challenges that differ significantly from other sectors. Recognizing the specific operational needs of parliaments, how can the use of tailored artificial intelligence applications enhance parliamentary activities? Jonathan, feel free to use the floor for 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. I think it's interesting that it does have very unique needs and challenges. that do differ from other sectors as well. And it's specifically, from my point of view, it's around the transparency, the accountability side of things as well. One of the things that we don't necessarily talk about a lot is still parliaments need to be accountable, or, Congress still needs to be accountable for the information that they generate. So by using, artificial intelligence, yes, we can actually enhance the outputs and the processes that we're actually utilizing, etc. But we need to be very mindful of actually how we're actually using that. And I think with the presentation I was sort of doing is that, it's a lot of commentary that we sort of talk about is specifically focused around the chat GPT world and use of artificial intelligence in that sort of regards. And I've spoken to multiple parliaments where, they'll just sort of put whole slabs of information into chat GPT to try to generate outputs as well. So the operational needs, usually a parliament, it means that things need to be turned around quickly. And, a use case of artificial intelligence is to assist with that process. But in the same token, you need to understand what you're putting into an artificial intelligence application to really understand what you're actually trying to enhance as well. So there are sort of very much tailored artificial intelligence applications out there, such as OpenAPI, OpenAI, as an example with Microsoft Azure. Now their focus is really about, you put in your data in a controlled environment, and then from that point, you can be guaranteed that it's training against your information as well, and only your information is then used and not trained for anybody else. So there needs to be that sort of consistency when you actually then are looking at, well, what are those sort of tailored AI applications going to be doing with your information? And then what are you actually trying to be doing to actually enhance those activities?
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Fotios, would you like to share your thoughts on this question as well?
Of course, Luís, we're talking here about tailored artificial intelligence, tailored to parliaments, but what sectors exactly should we target? So parliaments have different sectors, pretty much the same across all parliaments of the world. Of course, there are local specificities, but still, how could you identify the specific sectors the parliament would like to, would be interested in having artificial intelligence tools and services? So what we did with my team is we developed, so to say, an evaluation scheme. So we assessed different parliaments, and we narrowed down around 200. Let's use this number, around 200 of services that the parliament might need. So what we do is we go towards a certain parliament. We have an interactive workshop, and we let the focus group within the parliament to evaluate which of these 200 services they would like to have. So, and then the parliament has a data set with its own evaluation with a multi-parameter space. So we did this in the Hellenic Parliament in Greece. We did this in Argentina, the federal parliament, and we're about to do this in September in the Parliament of Canada, the federal parliament. So the goal is for the parliaments themselves to decide which applications of AI they would like to have in their own premises.
Thank you so much, Fotios, for your considerations. Joshua, allow me to bring the next question to you. The vast AR market includes solutions, as Fotios and Jonathan mentioned, are tailored to the specific use cases, such as the parliamentary operations, but also to generative AI tools that were designed for the wider public, the wider usage. How do these custom design solutions for parliamentary operation distinguish themselves from the generative AI tools that were designed for the wider public, such as ChatGPT or Google Bard? And what kind of precautions should be taken in using such AI tools that were not designed for parliamentary operations? Joshua, feel free to use the floor.
Thanks, Luís, for the question. Yeah, I mean, to set the stage, I think from the perspective of the work I'm doing, one thing I want to mention is I think often AI as a solution, sometimes looking for a problem that doesn't exist. And so I think AI can sometimes really be the solution for meaningful problems and sometimes not. So when it is a solution for meaningful problems, and it has become one a couple of times in the work I do on a day-to-day basis, I think it's very important that we demand the same quality and transparency of AI systems and models that, say, a doctor might demand of a model that helps diagnose a patient with a medical disease or with, X-ray adjudications and things like this. So I think it's important we demand that there's transparency in AI systems, that they're interpretable. And importantly, I think it's important that staff know and that we understand how machine learning and how artificial intelligence models are trained and what data are feeding into them. And I think that gets at the core question of what's a distinction between a custom design solution and something that is more general, like ChatGPT, for example. ChatGPT is designed, it's optimized to solve problems across numerous domains. And so it's optimized kind of globally rather than for any particular task, say a legislative task. Whereas custom design solutions can be fed specific data, and they can have more measurable goals. In the context, this is not, large language model in the large language model domain, but on the Appropriations Committee, we get a lot of member requests for what members want to see in the appropriations bills, but often we get a lot of duplicates. So we use basic AI, basic machine learning to help staff identify these duplicate projects. And so these are, it's a very measurable goal because we have a ground truth and it's a specific task. The other thing that I think is really important is that we understand what happens when our data is fed into a model, right? There's a big distinction between artificial intelligence and machine learning models that are built by companies, by the private sector, like OpenAI, or other companies, don't mean to pick on them specifically, or ones that are built in-house. The difficulty of building in-house these days especially is that more and more artificial intelligence is really just statistics with a lot of computational power, and the private sector has the money to purchase that computational power. So it's really important, especially if we're using these private sector models, these models built by companies in the private sector, we should understand what is happening with our data. Is there a risk of other institutions or organizations getting access to the data we feed into the model? For example, ChatGPT, it's important we, in the parliamentary system, staff on an everyday basis are thinking through legislative solutions, and often they're meant to be private to their office. They're not meant to be shared with the world. And so it's important we think about where this data is going. So I think that the key thing here is thinking about this distinction between common AI solutions versus these specialized solutions, and how they can solve meaningful problems and how we can kind of avert the risks when it comes to data leakage and data custody.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for your considerations. Professor Monica, would you like to share your thoughts on this question as well?
Yes, I agree with the previous speaker, but in my opinion, there are four main requirements that we needed to address when we would like to design in the Parliament some application based on AI in general. First of all, we need to maintain under control the democratic principles, so to include in the design by design since the beginning the democratic principle. We needed to pay attention to the legitimacy of the process. All the parliaments are regulated by internal regulations. It is a combination of a democratic principle, but also legal culture, and also for having a good dialogue between parties. So legitimacy is important. In other words, to understand when and where in the process we could omit to include AI for not affecting the legitimacy of the output. So probably this is a very big topic. And for instance, for avoiding to jump in a delicate mechanism between the negotiation and dialogue between the majority and minority parties, not affecting the guarantees of minority parties, or to provide the same information balanced to all. And these are just some examples. The second point is, in my opinion, very important, is to create independent infrastructure. We talking a lot about data sovereignty, but now it is important to have independent infrastructure for parliaments in order to control the inputs and the output of the AI, the training, the fine-tuning, and the inputs of parliamentary data only, in order to avoid hallucination or other so-called e-commerce approaches that are not bad in the commercial sector, but not could be very dangerous in the parliament, like polarization of the opinion, dark patterns, behavioral economics. This kind of stuff could be really not to be imported inside of a design application as is, so needed to be carefully understand and detect. Another point, in my opinion, is the semantic. We jump in the AI and we lose totally the meaning of the semantic web, but legal domain is a semantic domain. We're talking about a large language model, but exactly, we need to understand that the legal language is a specific instrument, so-called poietic of the creation of the law. Something doesn't exist before the law creates. So it is very important to recall this perspective. And finally, the transparency and explicability of all the process is fundamental for maintaining the member of the parliament and the institution as well, not only the members, individuals, consciousness and in the loop, on the loop, and in command, preserving the autonomy of the final decision. This is a part of a democracy and is fundamental to preserve.
Thank you so much, Professor Monica, for your considerations. Joshua, allow me to bring my next question to you. Perceptions of AI risks can vary significantly across different institutions. Are parliaments aware about AI risks, and how far are they from other government institutions' perceptions regarding those risks?
Yeah, thanks, Luis, for the question. So I think I'll speak specifically to the U.S. Congress, because that's obviously what I know. The interesting thing about the U.S. Congress, and I assume this is similar in many other parliaments across the world, is that each office operates very independently, right? During the COVID times, you might have one office in a hallway that had a policy that required daily testing and daily masking, et cetera. And the office right across the hallway might have no policies with respect to COVID, right? It might be totally different policies with respect to COVID, human resources, et cetera, all in the same building. And so you have 435 of these offices, of these personal offices, member offices in the House. You have 100 of these offices, personal member offices in the Senate, plus you have all these committee offices, which themselves have separate policies. So this presents a unique challenge for overseeing the use of AI in the legislative branch, because really, although there are institutional arms of the House and Senate, they are limited in their power to regulate AI. They are there purely to provide guidance, sometimes stronger sets of rules, but it's a difficult challenge we find ourselves in. And so, having been on the Hill for a few years in Congress, I think the awareness of AI risk really varies across the Hill, right? Well, some members are spearheading policy in technology and artificial intelligence. Many see technology and artificial intelligence as kind of secondary to many other policy areas. So the focus on these issues really varies. That said, already in the last 6 months, I've heard accounts of staff and even members. There's been some public media about this as well, about members using ChatGPT to generate opening statements for hearings on various topics, question lines at hearings for questioning witnesses, drafting memo. I know staff who have drafted memos or drafted bills with ChatGPT. So I know these tools are being used, the question is, to what extent are they being policed or regulated internally in a way that's productive? And so, right, as I mentioned, the House and Senate themselves are sovereign bodies, so they each have their own policies as well, and they have their further sovereign parts, offices and committees. And so they're rarely evolving at the same rate. And so there's as I mentioned, there's an institutional arm of these chambers, right? And so so what we call them non-designated technical managers, that's one way we refer to them. And so these people are really the people who have a duty to educate and act on these issues. And that means, right, not letting hot spots or cold spots develop, making sure the institution as a whole is moving in the same direction with respect to AI and digital literacy, which we'll talk about more later. And so, right, in the Senate, we have the Senate Sergeant at Arms. In the House, we have the Chief Administrative Officer. And these are perhaps the best offices to lead AI awareness. And that will provide an opportunity to give each of these sovereign offices, each of these sovereign seats, an equal capability and performance tool, an equal awareness about what the risks are, such that each office can kind of make their decisions as needed to move forward with these tools.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for your considerations. Allow me to bring my next question to you, Professor Monica. Recent decisions around the world have highlighted the potential privacy issues related to AI tools. Italy has banned ChatGPT as we speak on July 6, 2023, under the suspicion of privacy violation. How do you foresee this deliberation around the world?
So thank you so much for the question. Yes, indeed, it was not a suspicion of the violation of the privacy. The Italian Authority of the Privacy detected the violation of the GDPR, especially on the two topics, legal basis and collection of personal data by minors. So after a dialogue with OpenAI, the privacy policy was redefined or refined a little bit, and some countermeasures were included inside of a new framework of OpenAI. Probably the approach of the Authority of Privacy of Italy was, let me say, too much regulative rather than to open a dialogue before with OpenAI. But apart from the methodology, let me say, now we have a better privacy policy, and this is not limited to Italy, for sure. It's so true that I remember that European Parliament was sanctioned in 2022 by the European Data Protection Supervisor because European Parliament used Google Analytics, and so some sensitive health data of a member of the parliaments were transferred outside of the Europe borders to third parties. So this is a large topic. In my opinion, returning to the impact on the Parliament and the AI in Parliament, what this means? The meaning is to stress the point that we need to control, to not disclose some confidential data that are inside of the Parliament in general, especially concerning some working in progress that procedurally are not admitted to be disclosed. I give an example. In some countries, the committee's procedure are confidential, at least which one moment, a given moment. And also the negotiation in the dialogue of the democracy in the parties. So what happens if a senator or a member of the parliament use ChatGPT ingesting this material, and this material circulated in violation of the deontological code of conduct of the assembly? And this material is returned to third parties as answer to another query. So this is, in my opinion, the crucial point, how to have infrastructure for fostering as much as possible the benefits of this kind of AI, including ChatGPT, without to have a risk to disclose confidential information of the parliament. that should be confidential still a given point in the procedure, and so with the risk of democracy. So this is not limited to the privacy, it's a large dialogue, how to have an infrastructure under control for tuning address to the purposes of the parliaments.
Thank you so much, Professor Monica, for your considerations. Jonathan, allow me to give my next question to you. Given the heightened scrutiny of data privacy in AI applications, the handling of sensitive parliamentary data becomes critical, and confidence is of the utmost importance. In light of this, could you elaborate on the specific precautions and measures that specialized companies that works for decades with Parliament, such as NovaWorks, undertake in dealing with parliamentary data, and how does this differentiate them from the approach of more generalistic AI tools such as ChatGPT or Google Bard? Could you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's definitely been covered off in quite a few of the panelists sort of discussions as well. You know, and it's interesting when you look at a generalist AI tool such as ChatGPT, it's open to anyone. So you can't, you know, unless you actually are looking at the privacy policy, you know, you're having conversations with those technology companies, you're not necessarily sure where that information is, what third parties are actually working with, etc. from that. And, you know, as Monica was sort of saying, you know, part of the things which we need to make sure as a parliament that they need to understand is what data is being consumed, what data is being trained on, what infrastructure is it actually being used, where is that infrastructure being located, and what third parties are actually then supporting that process as well. So one of the things I think when dealing and engaging with a third-party vendor or whatnot, whether that's a consultancy firm, whether that's a technology partner, whether that's anybody outside of the parliamentary framework as an external consultant, is understanding how they're actually going to be dealing with that information, and what information will they actually be using to generate the information, you know, for the model itself. So, you know, when you're actually looking at sensitive parliamentary data, you know, you have concerns such as parliamentary privilege. So if you then give that information to a third party, is that then still under the purview of Parliament itself? Because you actually may not know where that actually information is being stored or processed and by who as well. So I think, you know, from a governance point of view, I think it's really important that the parliaments themselves understand what their governance framework for AI actually then looks like. And I think we'll probably be going into that in a bit more detail in this panel as well. But when you start with the governance framework, you can actually then start to understand what are you willing to give to AI in order to achieve what efficiency as well. So, and you have to give information to artificial intelligence to train it in the way which you then want to use it. So we're seeing, like in the case where, as sort of Joshua was saying, that people are just going out there and using these sort of common generalist tools, and we call it like shadow IT. They're just out there, it's free to use, they just put their information in there and they get something back, not without understanding the consequences of that as well, which is really important. If you look in the news, I think about a month or two ago, there was a big hoo-ha around Samsung, or it was a microchip company who put their confidential source code into ChatGPT to try to optimize their internal processes. And obviously that's now breaching a whole range of other things. It could be breaching export laws. It could be breaching a whole range of things which need to be considered. So when I look at what do we do to undertake in that sort of general approach, and why it sort of is different, is that vendors don't necessarily understand the concept of, you know, the sovereign body or the policy or the data ownership of parliamentary data and the importance of that information. So, you know, if you're dealing with a vendor who uses AI And we see vendors, you know, every single day come up with, oh, we've just released this new feature in our application. You know, here's an AI-based solution and it's doing this and this and this. Unless you know the details behind that, do you want to accept that risk? You know, is really going to be the key.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your considerations. Fotios, AI, while promising, is not devoid of ethical considerations. In a parliament's context, which potential risks could be found in AI systems that do not consider ethical principles? Fotios?
Yeah, well, we can speak about risks, but we can also, or always speak also about opportunities. So when, let's identify here, and we all agree on that parliaments are specific organizations, and they need to take into account all possible scenarios, including in those situations where everything seems fine. So, for instance, what could work for most of the parliaments could be something like a coordination committee on artificial intelligence. The thing is that for any given parliament, it's impossible, as I said in my previous presentation, it is impossible to know ex ante, so in advance, which procedures might be interesting for automating through using artificial intelligence. So who identifies this? It needs to be identified by the parliament. So, and once identified, it needs to be framed. I don't like to use here the word control. It needs to be regulated, which is a bit more mild of a word compared to control. So who does this? It has to be done in-house, I suppose. And the meaning of a coordination committee could be appropriate. It could include parliamentarians, but also people from the administration or also external experts. This is not a foreign concept for parliaments, because most of the parliaments in Europe, at least, they use coordination committees for planning their internal affairs. So it is, you can call it whatever you want, but in essence, such a body, internal body, could be very interesting for guiding or for identifying potential risks and then suggesting appropriate solutions, taking into consideration MPs' thoughts, politician thoughts, administration thoughts, but also the thoughts of people from society, so societal stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Fotios. Patricia, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, and you hear me?
Perfectly now. Thank you so much.
Very sorry, I apologize for, we don't know what happened.
No, our sincere apologies for the technical malfunctions. I will yield the floor for you to introduce yourself and share your relation to the topic of AI in Parliament. So please feel free to use the floor for your introduction, and then I will bring some questions to you as well.
Thank you, Luís. Greetings, everyone. I work at the Directorate of Innovation in IT of the Brazilian Chamber of Deputies, where I'm responsible for digital innovation, governance, and the strategy. Now I'm responsible for the digital transformation strategy, the AI strategy, and the AI governance. I think.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Allow me to bring my first question to you, Patricia. As we explored in this panel, the intersection of artificial intelligence and parliamentary operations, the journey from AI prototypes to operational systems stands as a significant hurdle. With that in mind, what are the main challenges to make AI prototypes become AI systems in the real world as part of the Parliament's digital service portfolio?
Yes. Indeed, many AI systems are not considered as part of the corporate digital service portfolio. They remain as a prototype for a long time, more than it was expected, or they are removed from the corporate portfolio after a short time in operation. What happens? Many prototypes are born in labs to verify if AI can help to solve a problem. But when the algorithm results seem good, the decision makers pressure the AI development team to put the systems in, to make adaptations and put the systems in operation. And this strategy lacks relevant steps to a reliable and robust AI system. I can bring you 3 or 4 examples of such mistakes. Firstly, in the labs, sometimes the data sample used for training didn't have enough volume or enough or an acceptable data quality. We also see cases in which the business staff, I mean the domain staff, didn't involve deeply to help the IT staff defining the best variables to be used in the algorithms, or even the best parameters to be used in the when monitoring the performance monitoring. A second mistake, I would say, it happens in the legal dimension. Legal restrictions are often overlooked during the prototype development. For example, parliaments, rules related to the parliament's regiment, related to any parliament's policy, or related to any law, especially the privacy law. They are often forgotten. And a third mistake, I would say, it happens when the prototype was built without considering any data governance. It raises the risk of any change in the data ecosystem over time impact directly the AI system. So for avoiding such situations, we do need to bear in mind that labs are very important, but they are an exploratory phase. If you want to put our systems in operation, we do need to start a formal project considering all the mandatory requirements to put those systems in a real environment. That's how I see the issue.
Thank you so much for your consideration, Patricia. If you allow me, I'd like to bring my next question to you and to Jonathan as well. With the integration of AI in parliamentary operations becoming more commonplace, as you mentioned, internal regulations must adapt. And considering the growing integration and usage of AI tools in parliamentary operations, in both formal and also in informal conditions, how should parliaments construct their internal regulatory frameworks to ensure a responsive AI use and development in the institution? Patricia, would you like to comment on that as well?
Okay, thank you. Luís, in a recent research encompassing public organizations crossing the 5 continents, I consider the academia recommendations, legislation in discussion, and a few international standards towards AI governance. To be compliant with all those recommendations, we need to consider a multi-layered framework, starting with, at the strategic level, an AI strategy, which can be part of a digital transformation strategy, but also an AI policy, AI ethical principles, guidelines are highly recommended. But we also need any kind of structure. It's not necessarily exactly an organization unit, and can be a committee, a council, or even a person to be in charge of AI governance. And Below, a few ancillary processes should be implemented. I mean processes for risk management and security management, both adapted to AI. But also a process for data governance, defining everything that can be done, must be done, should not be done with the data, defining all the responsibilities to all stakeholders that needs to decide regarding the data. A process for data quality, for personal data protection, and for auditing. Those processes are combined along with the whole AI system lifecycle. And the stronger is the partnership between the IT staff and the business, the domain staff, the more effective those processes will be. In the base, the AI development process encompasses practices for representing the subset of ethical principles applied to that specific system, processes for minimizing biases, and process for provide transparency in the development. In addition, after the system is in operation, we also need a performance monitoring automatically, human oversight to detect a few data biases that were not found in the project phase, and any kind of practice for gathering user feedback. In general, public organizations start focusing on finding data biases, but while they are doing that, they realize that they needed to improve their data governance to have a higher data quality. And naturally, the other processes appeared later, so far later. And another finding is that the complexity of those processes increases in case of outsourcing the development process, because the process outside the organization needs to be synchronized with all those processes and aligned with the strategic level. Here in Brazilian Chamber of Deputies, we are implemented a multi-layered AI governance framework. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for your considerations. Jonathan, would you like to share your thoughts on this question as well?
Yeah, I think there's probably not a lot to say on top of what Patricia was saying. I think, you know, it's very enlightening when you look at the framework, etc., that Patricia is actually putting in place, and the multi-tiered approach. So you need the strategy. So, you know, a lot of parliaments would have a data governance policy. They would have a lot of other policies like a privacy policy or transparency policy, etc. And it's really about, I think, how you then adapt those to use AI on top, because a lot of us sort of, if you look at data governance policies or data retention policies or privacy policies, they're very much related to what I call traditional policy or traditional ways of thinking. And as soon as we introduce the concept of artificial intelligence, machine learning, where we are not necessarily understanding, you know, at a very much a business level or conceptual level, how that actually operates from a very low level point of view, we need to make sure that, you know, that everyone is understanding of where we actually are going to be applying artificial intelligence and where we're not as well. And one of the things which I advocate for is that, you know, when you look at a Parliament's website, there is usually a privacy policy. There is usually a, you know, data policy which you can then look at from a citizen point of view. And what I've been advocating, like definitely over the last sort of year or so for Parliaments, is actually to then update those policies and actually then say, where are they actually applying the concept of artificial intelligence to? Are they actually applying that when you do a petition? Are they applying it when you do, like from a citizen's point of view, when you send information through? And, you know, sort of as Joshua was saying on one of his points, where there might be a lot of the same submissions coming in, and the use of artificial intelligence to detect duplicates or similar themes or other things like that. It's the way of being transparent about how we're actually going to be using artificial intelligence from a public point of view. I think having a governance committee which is focused around that, and having expertise, you know, to understand how it's going to actually impact the business, and because there is actually the human element behind this as well. So it's not just about looking at the technical side. There's the business side, there's the human side, there's the ethical side as well. So it's when you actually then bring that into that sort of committee level, you can actually then discuss all of those options and discuss all of those frameworks, which are really, really important to understand how you actually then effectively use. And also, I think the continuous life cycle, as Patricia was saying, that, you know, you might develop a application or you might develop something which utilizes artificial intelligence, but you then need to monitor it. Have you introduced a bias? Have you introduced anything at a long-term perspective that you may not have picked up when you actually originally implemented it or tested the application as well? Because the whole concept with artificial intelligence is that it's learning, it's growing itself. So you have to then manage that. You have to then monitor that to make sure that it is still within the boundaries of what you actually originally set that for.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your considerations. Professor Monica, allow me to bring my next question to you. Academia has a long history of contributing to the development and understanding of emerging technologies. How can the academia, and you are a prominent representative of the sector here, can contribute to the responsible AI systems in parliaments?
Thank you for the question. Yes, first of all, I think we have the responsibility to invest a lot of energy to create a theoretical framework and a legal point of view. I explained better my concept. So we needed to investigate what are the limits, the constraint, how to use AI in Parliament, respecting the democracy principle and the rule of law, and also the theory of law, including another dimension, as mentioned before by the previous speakers, also the ethic issues. Ethics is orthogonal to the law or legal issues, so we needed to consider this multi-level theoretical framework. In my project called HyperModelX, is a long-term 5 years project funded by the European Commission. The aim is exactly this, to create a robust legal framework, not only for Europe, but in general, in order to understand under which condition is possible to foster the great benefits of AI in Parliament. The second point is, I stress again, the university can create a sort of testing environment for creating proof of concept according with the institutions, parliaments. In Bologna, with Cineca, we have a high performance computing called Leonardo, the first in Europe. And we are creating an environment totally independent by other infrastructure for creating sandbox or proof of concept with the Parliament in the safe and secure way. So academia can contribute to create these. So a sort of empirical sandbox where the Parliament can experiment, especially to measure scalability, feasibility, impact on the human rights, and so. And yes, another point is obviously to create a human capacity building framework, because We need to create the next generation of parliamentary operators, civil servants, well prepared to have a good dialogue with artificial intelligence. And for good dialogue, I think I have in mind an attitude that is critical thinking oriented, but at the same time not afraid to have a good relationship with AI application and avoiding super conservative reaction. Last but not least, I very also involved in a network concerning legal interpretation of the output. There are huge amount of papers measuring the accuracy, indexes, recall, precision, false, positive, negative, positive, but very few papers creating a framework for measure the quality of result good for Parliament. What does mean a solution good for Parliament? How we can measure, which parameters, because are different. We have legal interpretation, statutory interpretation, many other parameters, not limited to the technical parameters. And in these, it is important to have guidelines how to measure output of this domain in artificial intelligence good for Parliament.
Thank you so much, Professor Monica, for your considerations. Joshua, allow me to bring my next question to you. As technology continues to advance, so too does the need for digital literacy. As AI could become an increasingly integral part of parliamentary operations, what measures should be in place to build and maintain digital literacy amongst members of Congress or members of Parliament, but also the staff as well, that support their mandates and work for an institution?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Luís. I think from my perspective, and my colleagues I think would agree as well, is that it all really comes down to the people. As I mentioned in a previous question, I talked a lot about, at least in the US Congress, the sovereignty of the many committees and personal offices across the House and the Senate. And so in my opinion, really the only way, or one of the key ways, I should say, I don't want to say the only way, one of the key ways to build and maintain digital literacy across the institution and across all of these sovereign offices is to make sure Congress is hiring and retaining technologists on staff. And I use technologists in the broadest of terms. And so I believe these technologists should be embedded in members' personal and committee offices. Some should be doing technology policy, which is actually, there's a program that I started out in called Tech Congress that actually places technologists on the Hill on Congress to do tech policy, but also to be doing some of this digital service, this digital modernization work. And as part of that, it's going to be natural that embedded staff build trust with their colleagues in their personal office or their colleagues on their committee or et cetera, whatever team they're on. And so that technologist is a trusted person to be conveying how folks should be using artificial intelligence and how folks should be using digital tools in a more literate, educated way. And so I've also seen firsthand how, the experience, knowledge, and background of having technologists on staff impact the final product, whether that's a hearing, a bill, or talking points, like a more policy-oriented piece, or whether it's a technological solution, an actual tool. And so, I think it's really important that we get staff to engage daily in these conversations about how we can use artificial intelligence and digital tools better to support their work. I've seen on the Committee on Appropriations, we have around 120 staff, and something that I've been really lucky to have the opportunity to do is develop relationships with almost all of these staff. And on a daily basis, I'm engaging with them on how the tools they use on a daily basis can better serve and support their work to write an annual appropriations bill and to provide conduct oversight of the agencies that they oversee. So I think getting staff to engage daily in the development of these tools and in these digital tools naturally develops digital literacy and gets people, frankly, excited to think about how these tools can make their life better and how they can make themselves better at their jobs. And it frankly gets people to start thinking about how we can modify process in a way that still is at its core part of the institution and part of the institutional knowledge, and also ensures that we're doing things in the most productive way that meets the goals of the institution. So I guess that's all to say is that I think it's really important beyond, you know, some other things like education and perhaps I'll stick with education. Perhaps besides that, it really comes down to the people and making sure we have experts scattered throughout the institution to make sure these sovereign offices all have trusted individuals nearby for which they can rely on for important information as it relates to AI and digital tools.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for your considerations. Fotios, would you like to share your thoughts on this question as well?
Yes, sure. You know, Luis, they call these kind of technologies disruptive for a reason. And they're not only disruptive for the systems in parliaments or organizations in general, but also for the traditional way of doing things, for the parliamentary culture, for the maybe for the training procedures that we use for developing HR in parliaments. And, you know, pretty much every parliament has in place such measures to develop its personnel. And we have an MOU, a memorandum of understanding with the National School of Governance. So assuming we would like to train them in, let's say, artificial intelligence to be everybody to be on the same page, at least the theory or the basic things. So who is going to train them? So there's a greater problem in administration overall, I would say, if not in society. I think Joshua said that everything is all around education, and I do agree with this. There's a problem who will educate personnel. For what I can say here to share my personal experience is that we had cooperation some months ago with NGOs who are really ahead of in this business in AI. So you could possibly identify people out there to do this, which is outside the normal lines of education through schools of governance and so on. So involving the private sector would be another issue, since the private sector is that develops ultimately these systems. And last but not least, academia, because academia is on top of the private sector, is there and is scratching the surface of what's possible with these technologies. I think there has to be a network, and the Hellenic OCR team does exactly this. Is trying to involve in parliamentary science, in studying parliaments, all available stakeholders, because in the end, nobody can be left behind, and we have a certain responsibility vis-a-vis our institutions to get them the best possible support in order for them to move forward.
Thank you so much, Fotios, for your considerations on this question. Patricia, allow me to bring the next question to you and to Jonathan. As we navigate the evolving landscape, as Fotios mentioned right now, on artificial intelligence, there isn't a way for us not to discuss the AI governance, which is crucial to learn from effective practices in this realm. Patricia, may you give us some examples of practices towards AI governance in parliaments according to your experience?
Okay, thank you. Let me see. Not only in parliaments, but in public organizations in general. A few organizations added new responsibilities to the data. I saw it in public organizations, not exactly in parliament. They add new responsibilities to the data committee that was created for the privacy law. Others have created an ethics committee, but most of them just use the steering committee to decide for the start a formal project. Regarding the data related process are highly dependent on the business staff. They are the best person, the best people to define the correct meaning of each metadata, what are the best variables to be used in the algorithms. They identify easily many types of data biases and what attributes are more recommended to be used for protected groups from biases, which are the best approach to get the user feedbacks. So the business staff has the answer to many things that must be defined. However, sometimes the business staff is not able to detect cognitive biases because they are related to social perception. In such situations, one recommend to create inclusive teams encompassing people of different skills, age, gender, and even political parties. We have tried it. It worked. So if you are dealing with the citizens' data, create a team that represents them. If you are dealing with the bills and speech, create a project, build a project team encompassing IT and the business staff, that people that are aware regarding all those discussions, everything that is being discussed in the bills and in the speeches. For transparency, there are parliaments and organizations in general that publish their AI systems code in the internet, but they are the minority. Others prefer establish an AI development process that requires everyone to scrutinize in many types of documents along with the whole process. They scrutinize everything. Others prefer writing scientific articles explaining the algorithms, explaining all the criteria used to support the decisions. But regardless the transparency practice, the simpler the algorithm, more explainable it will be. So simplicity is also a strategy for rising transparency.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for your considerations. Allow me to bring the same question for you, Jonathan. Would you like to share your thoughts as well on the topic?
Yeah, I think just following on from Patricia's comment, I think one of the sort of biggest things that we see from a external point of view is really, and what we sort of advise as well, is start off with a checklist around artificial intelligence. You know, when we are interacting as a vendor or an external consultant, we have to say, go through a cybersecurity review. And we have to fill in a checklist, and that is going to identify where the risks are. So they might say there's a risk over here, but we've had to go through a whole process to understand and give the Parliament the information around what the risk is from, say, a cybersecurity point of view. Now, I think that the other element is then a very simple approach would be to have a similar checklist and documentation around AI as well. So if you can look at it from that sort of point of view, is that you can really about actively communicating, you know, from a project level and understanding like cybersecurity, especially in the last couple of years, has been a big explosion, a big understanding of what it actually means from a parliamentary point of view. And I think we're just in that learning phase around artificial intelligence too. So if we can apply similar methodologies, again, there are other complexities with artificial intelligence, such as ethics and training and data bias and a few other things like that. But in principle, you know, it's really about, from a governance perspective, having a standardized framework that can be really reapplied in a meaningful way, in a simple way, if you have no framework to start off with. And that might be, do you have artificial intelligence in the proposed solution? Yes or no? You know, if they do, then you can ask more questions. But it's really about covering all the bases when we actually then look at that process.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your considerations. Professor Monica, allow me to bring my next question to you. The EU's approach to AI regulation could have far-reaching effects. How the EU AI Act, considering the recent amendments, can impact Parliament's work on producing and using AI systems?
Thank you for the question. Yes, in the current version, including the last amendments, the AI Act proposal classify most of the application of AI in Parliament inside of a sector of high-risk applications. What is mean? It means that the high in Parliament need a strategy, as several speakers said before, but also a task force for evaluating the impact on the human rights of the application, and also to have a management of the risk, so-called impact assessment and also risk analysis, in order to document everything, not limited to have a good documentation, but also for really evaluate. I think that another important issue should be the standards. So there are many standards now under discussion in ISO concerning the AI, and the standards could minimize in case some risks, but also to improve interoperability and also neutral technology in order to avoid another risk that is a lock-in. Also in the past, we assisted these in several technical sectors to embrace some technologies that create a lock-in effect. So I think that we can learn the lesson of the past and to use the standards as a countermeasurement for obtaining more neutrality and interoperability and quality monitor against also to the possible risk on the human rights. Because we need a sort of certification. So the AI Act proposal introduce the concept of certification of the AI products, like the cars, the chemical goods or other energy services. So in this perspective, Parliament, I don't know if are ready to enter in the mentality to have a sort of certification, let me say, approach of the software in general, and this is very important for the future, and especially in the light of a AI Act. Finally, there is another important issue, in my opinion. Most of the approach of informatic system are really static. So I explain. There isn't an approach of a temporal model and of the data. So the data model are often flat, not supported by a temporal model reasoning. In AI in Parliament, is, in my view, is super important to implement also a temporal model of information, because what is valid in a certain given period of a legislature is not so valid. And without a temporal model of the data management, we can risk to make a wrong prediction or spurious correlation. An example is, as you can imagine, if there is a repealed law, or if a sector of a law is totally recasted and renewal, so the prediction in the past are not so long valid. So the temporal model is another point very neglected in the research topic, but also in the application by the market, because in the e-commerce this is not so important. So we need it to the future in the e-commerce or in the private sector, but in the parliament the history is super important, and also to detect immediately some modification in the society as well.
Thank you so much, Professor Monica Palmirani. And I'd like to invite you now to comment, Fotios, on your impressions about this question as well.
Well, this is a very complicated matter, and you would understand this if you are in the EU, if you were in the EU, because it has so far-reaching consequences for so many business and governance sectors. Monica already said that what we have now in our hands is just an advanced version of what will be the AI Act. It's not enacted yet, so we can only comment on this. It presents a lot of opportunities, but also has some risks. So since here we have also, as a team, presented, sent in the consultation phase our considerations. So we know pretty good what were back then the issues. Starting from a very big one, I don't think it has changed much. The very definition of AI. So it has some issues even to defining AI itself. Again, as was identified already by Monica, there's the issue about high-risk application. Yes, indeed, there presents an opportunity for parliaments to develop specific rules in order to be ready for these kinds of risks. And also, as we said already, there could be commissions or committees within the parliament assessing the risks. There should be also standards, but there should be also strategies in the parliaments attempting to regulate AI. So all this could be necessary for parliaments to respond to the AI Act as this will be developed in the future. However, now, and therefore, here I am in the same opinion with Monica, I don't think that the majority of parliaments are ready. So, and since they're not ready, it would be rather a big problem for the AI Act if it is initiated in the next time to be enacted, to be enforced from the very beginning. Therefore, we are supposing, or we think that it will have large periods of time for allowing any stakeholders to adapt to this new reality. The same was the case also for the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. It allowed for a couple of years people and businesses and every stakeholder to adapt. And in the end, after this process, there were still lots of problems that were not solved. We are expecting a similar, if not the same, response from society to the AI Act. So it is a very important act. It is very complicated. It will have problems, but only reality, only the future will tell if it will be as successful as its developers hope it to be.
Thank you so much, Fotios, for your considerations on this question. Patricia, allow me to bring my next question to you. Legislation on AI is a global issue with varied approaches taken by different countries. How do you see the AI legislation in other countries, not the European countries as we just discussed, And what are their impact in Parliament's work when producing AI systems?
Okay, Luis, basically there are two types of AI legislation. Laws for specific AI systems, like the US made. I think Joshua will tell us about it. And horizontal laws based on risk category. The European AI Act fits the second mode. And the Brazilian bill follows the same path paved by the European AI Act. It's very, very similar, extremely similar. So what the European AI Act calls prohibited system, we call them extreme risk systems. The same, exactly the same. The high risk systems list are exactly the same. Thus, the key point is to identify if the Parliament systems is included in the high risk list. This is the point. Just for instance, the high risk list encompasses biometric systems, biometric system for authentication, which is very common everywhere, which is often seen in parliaments. And more, the list isn't limited. It can be increased according to a few criteria, like the text says exactly like this. If the system has potential risk to cause financial harms, if the system's results are not reversible, if the transparency level is low, so it can be added, it must be added to the high risk category. See, only those 3 items open a variety of AI systems easily found in parliaments. And for all of them, those processes and practices that I mentioned a few minutes ago are mandatory in the law. And as the Brazilian bill is similar to the European AI Act, I presume that the limited risk, a new category that was created in the last, in the recent amendments, I think it will be created. For that, the bill demands for practices for transparency. In this category, the ChatGPT fits. In sum, it is necessary to add skilled people to new tasks. It implies new costs. Hiring and the training are highly recommended. In case of outsourcing the AI development process, new requirements shall be added to the public procurement, which implies new costs too, of course. So many impacts that need a strategy.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for your considerations. Joshua, would you like to answer this question as well?
Sure, thanks, Luis. Yeah, so I don't know if folks have seen the Stanford University's AI Index report. It recently came out for this year, and it says that 31 countries of the 127 analyzed have passed 123 AI-related bills. So these bills tackle a broad swath of issues related to bias, workforce development, education, privacy, transparency, and more. And they all do so in slightly different ways. And so I think the thing that this question kind of triggered in my mind was that, right, without, especially for AI, but really for any technological issue, without global consensus, it's going to be difficult to prevent abuse of these systems, since, right, country borders are often meaningless in the tech context. And so, as you just heard from Patricia and from the prior question, there's a lot of legislation across many different countries, and many of them are even very robust pieces of legislation, but it's, in my opinion, it's going to be hard to make a meaningful path forward in the regulation of these systems unless there's some bigger global consensus that crosses borders. And I guess that kind of leads right to, in the US, we have a variety of laws that have been, or bills that have been introduced. And there are laws, right, like I've seen recently, Senator Peters and I believe a couple other senators introduced a bill to require agencies, this is within the federal government itself, to kind of disclose when they're using AI to constituents for any of their programs or processes. And so, all right, this is a very specific law, and it's a specific bill that's attached specifically to how the federal government can use AI in a very specific way. And I think that can be effective, but there's still the broader issue of how can we think about AI, right, and ensuring it's safe for society, and we have good transparency rules that span across the executive branch and go into the private sector and across the world. Another point I want to kind of point out or say is that, right, AI, I mentioned this earlier in the conversation, but AI is really just it's a branding over a set of newer technologies or older technologies that have just been catapulted because of an increase in computational power. So, right, machine learning was the old brand. We had data science. Prior to that, it was just computer science, informatics, et cetera. But things like deep learning, which powers, you know, the large language models we see in ChatGPT, were introduced as early, I'm going to get the date wrong, but it's either the 80s or the 60s or something. It was a while. It was in the late 1900s. Let's put it that way. So it's an old technology. It's just that we now have computational power to support it. And so I think we have every capacity to regulate these technologies. It's nothing, it feels new because there's a lot of power that's been, you know, brought to light by these new tools like ChatGPT, but these have existed for a while. So I think there's a lot of hope that maybe we can do something about this, and it's all just technology. The other piece I want to point out is that I think I'm certainly not an expert in this area, but I know it's something I've talked to my colleagues a lot about, is that we should make sure democratic states are taking the lead on establishing baseline standards for AI and for these technologies, rather than allowing authoritarian states to lead. And I think, like, many will praise countries like China for their robust regulations on AI and privacy, but in practice, the picture is much less pretty. So we have to be realistic about where we are and about where other countries are, and hopefully we can take the lead in showing kind of the world, and we, being like democratic states, can take the lead in showing the world what a good, transparent, privacy first way of using AI looks like. When it comes to the impact of AI legislation on Parliament's work, I think my first reaction kind of goes back to something I said at the start, which is that AI, while I think there are many meaningful applications of AI, I also think that it is often, especially in the hype we're seeing now, it's often a solution looking for a problem. So I think, at least from the US Congress perspective, although there's a lot of promise in AI and how we can use it, I think we have so much to do to modernize well before AI becomes relevant to its work. There was someone, we have this agency in the government, and there's the administrator of it. She's a technologist is her background. And she always said, her quote was kind of like, make the damn websites work. And so I think that's, in my opinion, that's kind of where we're at with modernization in the US Congress. And I think, again, I do think AI has some really important and meaningful applications. I also think there's a lot of exciting work just to provide good, useful tools for staff. Sometimes that might include AI.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for your considerations. We are reaching the end of our panel discussion today. Just before we go, I'd like to yield the floor to each one of you for a very brief closing remarks or any final thoughts you might have. Fotios, would you like to start? Any final thoughts you might have?
Thank you, Luis. Well, I agree with Joshua, what he said. There's a lot to do regarding modernization, and there are a lot of sectors to be modernized, and therefore and each parliament is different. So there's no size fits all here, and every organization should look in its own environment and prioritize the solutions that are best to be tackled by new technologies, and some of these technologies are based on AI. So it's a new kid on the block, but it's not the only one. So regarding now AI, it's here and it's here to stay. I don't think that we can debate this. So apart from prioritization, one should be aware that these things are coming, these kind of technologies are coming, and parliaments better prepared for this. So how to do this? You can use different approaches, but it seems that the best possible solution is some sort of internal body trying to integrate all the knowledge that it's out there. It could involve parliamentarians, it could involve administrators or people from civil society. So being able to prepare developing strategies, I think this is the best possible way to respond to this challenge, to the challenges that are posed by artificial intelligence and other disruptive technologies.
Thank you so much, Fotios, for your closing remarks and for your participation. Joshua, would you like to share any closing remarks to today's debate?
Yeah, I think generally the thing I agree with all the panelists here, and it's been an honor to be here and really wonderful to have this discussion. First of all, I think generally the thing, my kind of closing thoughts as a summary of what I've been thinking about is I think it's important that we take AI in context for what it is and understand what it isn't as well. And I don't mean we here, because we all very clearly understand what it is and what it isn't, but I more mean like we as a society, and we right within the parliament, we as parliamentary staff and as members, making sure people understand what artificial intelligence is and what it is not. And what it is really, again, and I'm hitting the nail on the head many times, and this is just from my perspective, is a lot of AI is really just like old statistical models paired with increasingly, large computational power. So I think it's important to think about what it is, what promise it holds, but what risks it has as well. And it's really important that we think about within the parliamentary system, within the US Congress specifically, is how I'll talk about it. And I'm sure there are similarities to other countries as well. Is that we really focus on solving problems that members and staff have and that the institution has, and thinking about AI as a potential tool in the toolkit, rather than the other way around, about looking at AI and thinking about how can we use AI on something that we need it for. So thinking about the problem before the solution is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for your closing remarks. Professor Monica, would you like to share your closing remarks as well?
Yes, thank you so much. So I would like to give 4 points of final conclusion. So first of all, that is necessary a multi-level approach of governance of AI in Parliament, because many competencies are necessary. Preventive approach, so ex-ante analysis, not limited to the checklist, because checklists are too much static. So it's a good instrument also in our project we use, but it is much more important to have a proof of concept, Scrum, agile, and preventive approach analysis. The third point is a hybrid approach. Hybrid approach means to use many AI together. Some AI, I mentioned it before, are more critical, like subsymbolic AI or network analysis is okay, machine learning depends. So it is important to mix each different kind of AI in order to mitigate the risk of someone and to use the others for explaining in case. For the certification and the standards, because it's also a matter. And finally, the human-computer interaction. Human-computer interaction is a dialogue between human and AI is fundamental for return the results and explain the results. So also these should be put in the agenda. So visualization, good interaction, return of a feedback, selection, explainability is a very key point, especially in this domain in the Parliament.
Thank you so much, Professor Monica, for your conclusion. Patricia, would you like to share your closing thoughts as well?
Thank you. Yes, Luis. I start agreeing with Fotios and Professor Monica when they say that parliaments are not prepared. But I think something must start. We need to start, even in a short, in a few steps, in a short portion, making some adaptations in our process. We do need to start. I also agree with Joshua and Jonathan when they highlighted the need that for an understanding of the whole organization, make everything aware exactly what we are dealing with. Maybe the first step is literacy. So my last message is, let's start. Everyone can start according to your conditions, but give this first step. I also thank you so much, all the colleagues here, and the panelists, and once again, Luis, for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for your closing thoughts and for your participation. Jonathan, would you like to have the honors to close today's debate with your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think my final thoughts is that AI is here and it's already being used. I think that's the biggest thing is that, and I think, you know, based on that, because of a whole explosion, especially in the last sort of 6 to 12 months around AI, is that the key thing is starting the conversation. So understanding, you know, that there might be the impetus or you might have parts of your parliament that are actually already using it that you're not aware of. So I think starting the conversation, you know, understanding what the use cases are for it become really, really important, because, you know, AI, you know, you shouldn't find a problem which AI will solve, if that makes sense, if it's not a problem. So like what Joshua was saying was that, you know, which is really important, is that AI is just a tool in the toolkit. It doesn't have to try to solve everything. Machine learning doesn't have to solve everything. Use it when you need to understand, you know, what you're actually trying to achieve with it, I think is really the key. So for me, understanding what your use cases are, understanding could it be applied, yes or no, and then taking that discussion and really then forming the governance behind that as well is probably my last, you know, sort of closing remarks.